Really, the only thing that makes sense is to strive for greater collective enlightenment. Ask me not, are you right-wing, but ask me, are you a committed believer in individual freedom, the values of the Enlightenment? Then, yeah, if being right-wing means believing Adam Smith was right, both in the wealth of nations and the theory of moral sentiments, then I'm right-wing. Everyone has a spirit that can be refined, a body that can be trained in some manner, a suitable path to follow. You are here to realize your inner divinity and manifest your innate enlightenment. Borrowing knowledge of reality from all sources, taking the best from every study, science of mind brings together the highest enlightenment of the ages. Enlightenment is not something you achieve, it is the absence of something. All your life you have been going forward after something, pursuing some goal. Enlightenment is dropping all that. People can hate on you for doing what it is that makes you happy, but ultimately, it has to belong to you. It shouldn't matter what anyone else thinks. Life is not easy. The road to happiness is not a path well trodden. You have to find your own path to enlightenment. The United States is truly remarkable, a nation founded on a set of Enlightenment ideals so beautifully expressed by the Declaration of Independence and codified in the U.S. Constitution. We should feel good about our ideals, even when we don't quite manage to live up to them. Christianity and Judaism have gone through the laundromat of humanism and enlightenment, but that is not the case with Islam. Always keep your mind as bright and clear as the vast sky, the great ocean, and the highest peak, empty of all thoughts. Always keep your body filled with light and heat. Fill yourself with the power of wisdom and enlightenment. In the early 19th century, with Enlightenment optimism soured by years of war and revolution, critics were skeptical of America's naive faith that it had reinvented politics. Do not think you will necessarily be aware of your own enlightenment. The Enlightenment view of mankind is a complete myth. It leads us into thinking we're sane and rational creatures most of the time, and we're not. Whereas a lot of Buddhism concerns itself with stages of enlightenment, various precepts and moral codes, and even power structures and hierarchies, Zen is just like, shut up, sit down, and observe your thoughts. Oh, and by the way, what you perceive as you doesn't actually exist. I loved the minimalist approach of it. With the development of industrial capitalism, a new and unanticipated system of injustice, it is libertarian socialism that has preserved and extended the radical humanist message of the Enlightenment and the classical liberal ideals that were perverted into an ideology to sustain the emerging social order. My lords temporal, today is the day to rise up against the regiment of lords spiritual and proclaim the values of enlightenment, compassion and common sense. Matangi's mantra is AIM, which is MIA backwards. She fights for freedom of speech and stands for truth, and lives in the ghetto because her dad was the first person in Hindu mythology who came from the hood, but had gained enlightenment through not being a Brahmin. The theories of the major philosophers of the 18th century secular enlightenment were biblical and theological in spite of themselves. Europe and the world are waiting for us to defend the spirit of the Enlightenment everywhere. Just being the seeker, somebody who's open to spiritual enlightenment, is in itself the important thing, and it's the reward for being a seeker in this world. God is not anything human. God is a force, God is chaos, God is unknown. God is terror and enlightenment at the same time. Democracy must be built through open societies that share information. When there is information, there is enlightenment. When there is debate, there are solutions. When there is no sharing of power, no rule of law, no accountability, there is abuse, corruption, subjugation and indignation. Ultimately, education in its real sense is the pursuit of truth. It is an endless journey through knowledge and enlightenment. I believe that art has been a vehicle for me that's been about enlightenment and expanding my own parameters, to give me courage to exercise the freedom that I have in life. I would say any behavior that is not the status quo is interpreted as insanity, when, in fact, it might actually be enlightenment. Insanity is sorta in the eye of the beholder. In Gnosticism, the physical world did not ultimately matter, which meant physical suffering did not matter either. Seeking enlightenment meant cultivating an attitude of detachment, even indifference. The left has come to regard common sense, the traditional wisdom and folkways of the community, as an obstacle to progress and enlightenment. Not creating delusions is enlightenment. To know yourself as the being underneath the thinker, the stillness underneath the mental noise, the love and joy underneath the pain, is freedom, salvation, enlightenment. In my own life I know that my state of cheerfulness is a reliable gauge of my level of spiritual enlightenment at that moment. The more cheerful, happy, contented, and satisfied I am feeling, the more aware I am of my deep connection to spirit. We live in the age of entitlement, as opposed to enlightenment. When a man becomes a writer, I think he takes on a sacred obligation to produce beauty and enlightenment in comfort at top speed. Enlightenment is the key to everything, and it is the key to intimacy, because it is the goal of true authenticity. And as long as you're subject to birth and death, you'll never attain enlightenment. Working with plants, trees, fences and walls, if they practice sincerely they will attain enlightenment. Today, my heart and soul lives peacefully for the hope that the 21st century will have to face a great challenge, a peaceful struggle for the enlightenment of humanity. As a graduate student at Oxford in 1963, I began writing about books in revolutionary France, helping to found the discipline of book history. I was in my academic corner writing about Enlightenment ideals when the Internet exploded the world of academic communication in the 1990s. Ignorance has always been the weapon of tyrants, enlightenment the salvation of the free. Many spiritual teachers, in Buddhism, in Islam, have talked about first-hand experience of the world as an important part of the path to wisdom, to enlightenment. It is not the simple statement of facts that ushers in freedom, it is the constant repetition of them that has this liberating effect. Tolerance is the result not of enlightenment, but of boredom. There are about 15 million Muslims in the EU. They face ignorance, insult and even persecution. They cannot be wished away. To impose enlightenment freedoms is self-defeating. Anyway, the Muslims have their own enlightenment. Evil is an attack against human spiritual development and enlightenment. All evil, badness, neurosis, it has one motive and one motive only, which is to destroy your chance of arising above yourself. In the 60s, there were no guidebooks to Asia, at least none that suited young shoestring travelers. No one on the hippie highway carried a copy of Fodor's Islamic Asia. The route to spiritual enlightenment wasn't revealed in the pages of the latest Baedeker. Intrepids were on a journey of spontaneity and reinvention. The real meaning of enlightenment is to gaze with undimmed eyes on all darkness. The Enlightenment is under threat. So is reason, so is truth, so is science, especially in the schools of America. The Enlightenment attacked religion, Christianity, mainly, for two reasons, that it was a set of ideological delusions, and that it was a system of institutional oppression, with immense powers of persecution and intolerance. Ultimately, you have to work for your own enlightenment, for smarts, or it gets boring. When doing theater, you have to find great satisfaction in the small things. There's going to be a repetition and a redundancy night after night, but it's the small variations in those moments, a word, a tone of voice, the smallest sense of enlightenment that can happen in an instant on stage, that will be the most rewarding. I believe that politicians have a public trust to further debates about important issues. I firmly believe that every public debate holds the prospect of enlightenment. Hip-hop is my vehicle for scientific enlightenment. It wasn't until my music career matured where I was exposed to science as an intellectual pursuit. By any reasonable measure of achievement, the faith of the Enlightenment thinkers in science was justified. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.